Yo, what is going on? Welcome back to another episode of the Seats to Streets podcast. I'm your host, JR Horn. That guy's still Brian Gorman, the last time I checked, especially his little name tag right there. We have to put those up there. Sometimes he forgets, but it's okay. It's details. But we are wrapping up our series on the 5 questions a healthy church can answer, meaning that you can answer this. It's the 5 questions a healthy church can answer, not needs to answer, but we want to show that these are the 5 questions that are a mark of church health. And if you've gone back, if you've kept current with us, or you've gone back and you've watched these in succession, and you realize, man, I'm struggling with one of these questions, it doesn't mean you're an unhealthy church. You're actually taking the steps of becoming healthier by going through some of these things and pushing yourself. It just means it's a mark of greater health and greater ministry ability. And that's what we want to do, is to be able to have some of these conversations and approach some of these topics to allow you to be equipped to create committed, growing disciple makers. That is our goal. So I know that we have a lot packed for this one, so I'm not going to waste any time. Last week, Brian, we talked about understanding who God is sending us to teach, to disciple. Who is God sending us to disciple? We want to wrap this up. The 5th question is, how will we disciple the people to which God is sending us? How are we going to disciple them?
So the fancy term that gets thrown around is discipleship path. People oftentimes talk about discipleship path within a church. And I think that's awesome. One of the struggles that I think sometimes people find it is when they try to think through this, they don't have the other components we've already talked about to help them go, what's the healthiest path for us, for the people we're trying to reach, for the community we're trying to reach, for the way we're wired to do it, for all of those things. That's why especially the target audience is so key in the conversation we're having. So here's what you're going to do. This one, we're going to lay this out, like the specifics of how you go about this.
Yep.
Get yourself a really big whiteboard. Step 1.
I love whiteboards. Step 2 is buy really good dry erase markers. Don't cheap out, folks.
No, you need these.
Mine, little bit of mine right there. Love my whiteboard.
Yeah. So you're going to need a whiteboard for this, right? Because this is going to be some conversation and some writing and some erasing. But what you're going to do is we're going to build a giant matrix of information, because this is all going to play out as we go through this. People oftentimes say discipleship path, and it sounds like it's linear. There are linear aspects of it, but it's not actually as linear as people think. I actually think of it a lot more like a graphic equalizer on music. If you're familiar with music and you're watching a graphic equalizer move as music is playing, you find that certain frequencies jump, certain frequencies drop. They kind of jump back and forth depending upon what's going on in that music. The same thing happens in people's lives. You're kind of building a bingo card, and I'll explain why in a moment. But here's what we've got to start with. We've got to figure out what goes along the top of that board first.
Well, bingo.
What goes on the very, very top line is what you're just going to call your steps. If it's a discipleship path, what are the steps of your path? This is simply asking, what are the core things that we believe spiritually mature people in our church would do? So I'm going to give you just a bunch of options. And then, JR, if you can kind of maybe show how some different churches have put these together, right? I know some churches that would say, Sunday morning worship. That would be their thing, or worship in general. A lot of churches, would have study. Some churches get more focused. They're going to call it a life group. They're going to say a connection group, a small group, whatever. Some churches would put in service, like they volunteer somewhere. Some churches would put in giving. Our church uses the term investing. Some churches use evangelism or gospel or telling others, right? So some churches put that. I know some churches, if you come from a more Pentecostal or charismatic background, would say like there's some gifts of the Spirit are part of that path, like some sort of recognition of those coming into action. So you've got to be able to look at, well, what do we think are the behaviors, like the high level behaviors of a spiritually mature believer, where they should have these things. Our church, for example, says that if we're a place for everyone, we're a place where everyone welcomes, and we're talking about inviting them into worship, where everyone makes room for others in their life groups, and they're joining
Mhm.
together in conversation, where everyone serves and everyone invests. We're
Right.
talking about investing back in our community, investing in people, and financially investing in the work we're doing too. So welcomes, makes room, serves, invests. That would be the what would go across the top of ours. So, JR, where have you seen some other churches as to what maybe the top of their whiteboard would say?
So I've seen some churches go super broad, just encapsulating everything. Maybe not so much worship, study, serve, which is totally fine. When we look at the life of a believer in Scripture, we would see that that would be a part of a natural progression. Sometimes they would use words like no, like I know at one church I've coached in the past, no, so SOW and grow, or
Mhm.
no, grow and sow. Flip that around. That's their big steps. There's a knowing of God, there's a growing in God, and there is a sowing seeds for God aspect to that. I've seen other churches become so specific that it's not just worship, study, serve. It's, you know, worship service, right? Because it could be Sunday morning, could be Sunday night, like Thursday night,
Mhm.
whatever your offering is. They get so specific of blank time worship service, um, in home life group. They completely define what
Mhm.
that study looks like. And
Mhm.
then these are the 3 local and 3 global places that we are moving our people into service. And one of those
Yeah.
global places, usually when a church gets that specific and that rifle focus, one of those global places, or maybe an entry point that's branching out of local and global, is we want to send someone who is a committed, growing disciple maker. We want to send someone to be in local or global missions as a full time. Like that's their next step for that person when they get all the
Mm.
way to the progression. How do we send you out into the harvest field, like Jesus says in Matthew 9? So it
Mhm.
could be something like worship, study, serve, or if you've gone through these steps, you understand your culture, you understand who God's sending you to disciple. Maybe your people should be something like this worship service, this life group, and this thing over here for service. I know
Right.
one church in Denver, Colorado, fully understands that in their culture, their demographic, and their geographic location in the city, they have a massive opportunity and influence into the young professionals crowd.
Mhm.
So their number one step before worship service is they actually throw a monthly networking mixer for young professionals. That is their
Yeah.
step into worship,
So
then into study.
I would actually push on that a little bit. Say they may write it as their step, but it's let me show you where that might actually fit different
Mhm.
than that concept.
Sure.
So top of the board, you're going to want to write out your what are the things that every single person in your church who is a faithful follower of Jesus should be doing.
Mhm.
Every single person. That's the point of what goes to the top.
Yep.
Which
Those
brings
steps.
us now, what do we put over on the far left side, right? If we build our matrix out, after if the step is the first line, the next line is what's the entry point? What's the
How do they
entry
get in there?
into this?
Yep. What's the on ramp?
So an entry, an on ramp, yeah, another good word, however you want to word that. What goes here is something that is low commitment, high value,
Hmm.
that moves them into making this a regular part. So, like if I'm using the worship as an example, if someone comes to church one time, then they've kind of started down that column. But how do I help them feel like, no, they're going to be committed to this? So, I would say, for example, in my opinion, the church you're talking about, they want them in worship. And
But
what's
that
the
this could be
entryway to worship might be
for them is that mixer.
this, so we can
Hmm.
get you to this.
Hmm.
Maybe. So I'm just going to throw some other examples, and JR, you throw some too. Like one of them that I know of is, in fact, I'll give you this. I'll tell you what we're working on in our church to build right now for the demographic that we reach is we're kind of calling it 5x5. We actually just ran a beta test of this, but just finished it this last week. But the idea is at any point, someone can send a text into the church to a particular number, and it will trigger a process where every day they get, for 5 days a week, for 5 weeks, they'll be sent a link that will give them about a 3 to 5 minute video that will give them the basics of who is Jesus, who's the Bible, how do I live this out? Really
Hmm.
quick, high level that they can start 5 minutes a day, 5 days a week for 5 weeks, and they can have really low commitment, comes to you. It's not a big deal. Watch it in the morning, but it triggers that process because in our work, we want to make things very on demand for our demographic. So that would be our entry step into saying, hey, how do I make this a bigger commitment into my life, being in worship on a more regular basis? I've seen like the pizza with the pastor type thing. I mean, what are some other things that you've seen is that I just want you to get to know the church entryway?
Well, one of the things that I've seen that works really well is, and I know it's, I think it goes back to Andy Stanley at North Point, I believe. They've got a starting point, where it's literally the starting point. Once you understand, once you've been committed enough to go, yeah, I think I want to take my next step to get to not just to know the church, but it's the starting point for me being a part of the church. If you don't have any sort of starting point, or for your church, if it's our church 101 class, I highly consider that being a part of it. Now, also, if you're a church that is going to offer something like that, and you have a lot of young families, your target audience is a lot of young families, don't offer that class at 3 p.m. on Sundays.
Right.
It's nap
That's where the demographics matter.
Don't do it.
Something that goes along with that is think about, hey, I don't know that I like your church yet or not. I know that I'm ready to make that commitment in that column, and you need an entry point in every column. So you may need, I'm just going to give you an example of what you might begin to fill out across this column, right? For us, that 5x5 would be there. For you, it might be a pizza with the pastor, 1 hour, hour and a half session, right? All of your entry points need to have a defined start and stop time.
Yes.
They need to have a length of time someone's committing to. You're not asking them to do this over and over. It's not going to be a big weighty thing. So under your second column, again, I'm just going to use for our sake, I'm going to tell you what, ours that welcomes, makes room, serves, invests. So under the makes room, the life group thing, the idea there is that we'd ask someone to commit to a short-term life group,
right,
for a very specific thing that we're doing, right? And then those bleed into being a part of one regular. That group may end up lasting long term. And again, some of this is stuff we in our church are actually building right now, along some of this, because we went and said some of what we're doing isn't doing what we meant.
One of the things that I've seen that's actually works really well is that same idea, Brian, of knowing that if we know our people potentially aren't have a positive past with church, and even then understanding that if we're growing, a lot of our people don't know each other. It's kind of awkward to walk into someone's house for the first time, unless it's the pastor, unless it's someone on staff, like with Pizza with the Pastor. It's a little awkward for that first night of life groups or whatever. So the church we go to here in Louisville understands that, and they're like, that's all right. September and January, we're throwing life group launch parties to where everyone comes to the church. And it was over 130 people from our church came to the life group launch, catered meal, awesome barbecue. They were able to hear the vision of what life groups are about, the ability, like, this is the time frame, this is the commitment you're making. These life groups are kid friendly, these life groups aren't, whatever. And it took down so many barriers because it was a smooth entryway into that step of study, into that step of growing, whatever you call it for your church.
Yeah. So I'm gonna give you some things that might go on your list there, right? Under for us, the welcome, you might have that 5x5, you might have that pizza with the pastor, you might have some there. Under the makes room, you might have a life group launch party, you might have a short-term group that only meets for like 5 or 6 weeks. It could be just a one-time, hey, come and listen to us talk about, and we'll put you in a group by the time it's said and done. Under things like for us, for serve, right? Your church may use a shape study, like understanding how you fit. Might be a spiritual gifts test. Again, this is a low commitment, 1-time, 2-time type thing. It's good for you. It's not about the church. It's actually something for you. The entry point is good for you. Under the invest, right? Maybe under the invest is helping you be able to take that first step to consider giving. It might be doing a financial development class that's a one-night class for you, like what are the basics of building a budget. Some of those things might be easy things that you would put in, but it's very intentional. Which brings us then to the next line on our matrix. And the next line is the action. Now, here's where I want you to think, and this is what this is. I want you to think, if they stay in this column, what is the action that we would hope that they do that shows that that this column has actually become a part of who they are? So, for example, under the welcomes, it might be, yes, they're in church every Sunday, but what's the box they can click, and I hate to say that knowing what I'm about to say here, but what's the
Mm.
box where we would go, oh, they're doing this, right? We're not saying this is a spiritual thing. The box are checking. So like in our church, what's the box? Is they got baptized.
Mm.
Like they have been welcomed into the church and welcomed into the kingdom of God through baptism. That's a box. Under the makes room, we can see they are a regular participant in a home life group. Right?
Mm.
Click. There's they have now been attending a regular life group with a leader. Right. Not something the church has put. This is a box check. Underserved. They are in an ongoing volunteer role. Right. Not just a one-time, hey, I showed up to help out for the event. They're in a regular ongoing volunteer role. Under the invest, they are a regular generous giver. Right. So we have this, you need a defined box that says this is, we're not saying that this means that they're spiritually healthy. We're means if it's the best proxy we have. It's the best guess that we'd say if they're doing this, we would assume that things are going well for them and at least shows that we're going the right direction. If they all of a sudden sort of unclick that box, oh, they're not in a life group anymore, that should be a tell for us that, oh, something for us to do.
Yeah.
So that's where the action comes into play. And there's so many of those. But that's for every individual church has to figure out what they would define as, here is the way that we know that this is being done.
Yeah. Marker,
it's
a flag, achievement. What has someone gone through that you go, oh, yep, they're on the path that we believe is the greatest discipleship path for our church. Yeah, 100%. So what's next? So now, they've entered and they perform an action.
Now we're going to move to what I would call the handoff. And what I mean by that is this is where we're kind of going, hey, this is yours. And everything so far, we've been sort of spoon feeding and drawing you. This is the maturity step of it.
There we go.
What's the thing where we're going, hey, we need to give you this information so you become sort of the expert here. Mm-hmm. So some examples under the makes room, right? This one is where we're going to take you through a much longer life group that specifically is focused on our purpose, values, and vision, how it's lived out, where you fit in it. This isn't the one night thing. This is multiple weeks of teaching and training. Or I've seen another church use the Alpha program. I've seen other churches use Rooted as a program.
Great
but
program.
I've also seen them. But this can be. I've seen other churches use Rooted under the makes room bracket. Because they're preparing people for service. Or I've seen them put it under the service bracket as right. I've seen you put the pieces where you want to put the pieces. It's okay. It can go in all these components. You just need to know where specifically it fits in your structure. That's okay. Wherever it fits in your structure. So you may do a shape like a one night, spiritual gifts type class, or you may do something where like, no, we want you, if you're in our service bracket, we have 4 different levels of serving here in our church. The way that we know that you've made it into the handoff bracket is you have completed the 3rd or 4th level. And some training and some theology and some teaching and classes that go along with that we have built out, that we can see that you are completing the 3rd or 4th level depending upon the level of service that you're here in our church. Right. Those components are there. Under the invest one, right? That under invest, and we don't have this yet. We're trying to build this box out. Is we're trying to be able to say, how can we train people to evangelize better, to share with their ones? But other churches could take that concept and move it actually over to the makes room category for us. They may go, hey, we want people who are making room for others. How do we help train them to teach and reach others? It may go there. That's what I say. The parts can be sort of interchangeable as long as everything has its seat, its spot in the box, that we're doing this for this reason. Right. And so that's where that handoff becomes so key.
And this is, I'm glad you started off with understanding and prepping everyone that like before this, we were kind of spoon feeding. This is the mark of, this really is starting to be the extreme mark of maturity, the mark of self-feeding. If we look back and we look at what COVID has shown us, is that 30% of the churches kind of walked away because we never got them to the point of self-feeding, never got them to the maturity level of this is essential for me and for my life in Jesus. So this is that mark, that handoff mark is where, man, a lot of that is not just handed off within the church, hand it off to them as they're owning this. And these are the people that are really going to drive what your church is doing.
They've got to be
forward.
committed.
Yes.
You're making something. You actually want to make something that's kind of hard for them to do, because you want to say, no, if you've completed this, man, you are ready. Which brings us to the very last thing on our list, over on our left side, is what's the end result? Mm-hmm. This is where we become reciprocal, right? In ours, right? What's the end result of someone who understands the concept of being welcomed? Is they are welcoming others. That we can show this person has invited friends, family, coworkers to church. That they have welcomed others. Under the mixed room, right? We have someone now who is now leading life groups, right? That's that end result. Under the serves, someone who is at a tier 3 or tier 4 leadership position of running teams, right? That would be that. Right. Not everybody's going to make it there, but that's the, and so we've got those for each of those 4 columns. And here's the way to think about it, is with each person in your church, you should be able to look at their bingo card,
right?
And go, can I get a full card? Where are they at? And that would automatically tell you, hey, I've noticed that, that Bob over here is really good on column 1 and really good on column 3 and pretty good on column 4, but we got nothing in column 2. He might not be growing spiritually in knowledge of God. Right. How do we help Bob there? Oh, right. I see that Frank over here is really he's knocking these 3 out, but he's not giving anywhere. I wonder if there's some financial struggles we need to help him with. Like, is there something he's not sharing with us because he's embarrassed about? How do we help him with this? Because we know he understands the concept. We've been teaching it. What's going on in his life that maybe we need to pastor and care for him in, that he may be embarrassed to share, right? You get these details, and you can look at every individual in your church and go, how are we doing at developing them into disciples who make disciples? We can look at it as the whole church. We can put numbers in each of those boxes to go, we have this many people here, this many people here, red, green, yellow, those boxes. We can do it by an individual perspective within this great big matrix. We can do it within how much effort and energy are we spending as a church financially into this. You can build your budgets around this, but you get this thing put together. I'm telling you, I know you're drinking from the fire hose today. I get it. You put this thing together, boom. Your structure is put together to show that you are making disciples. And if you find at the end of doing it, your people aren't making disciples, go back into the structure, change a box.
Yep.
Maybe that's the system. There's just a box, an item's in the wrong place in the box. Change the box.
The org I work with, we would use the word multiplication. Like that's the end result that we want to see. We want to see the handoff of the ministry to the locals. And that they would multiply the ministry, because we serve and we send individuals overseas to serve in some of the most unreached areas of our world, and that end result is multiplication. We don't want to see addition. 1 + 1 is 2, and +1 again is 3, +1 again is 4. We want to see multiplication happen, and that's the end result. So we know in the previous 20 some minutes, like you've probably sat there at some point in time and your jaws kind of dropped, you slumped in your chair a little bit and went,
okay, wait.
Oh my goodness.
Pastor, let me love you here for just a second.
Yes.
Here's what you do. You go out and you look through your church and you say, who are the people in my church that exemplify the columns? Your job's to build the columns. Like you don't have to fill them in. You just have to say, this is the path. 1, 2, 3, 4 across the top of
steps
it.
Who
are the people in my church that exemplify those steps? And you go to them and go, here's what we want to create. Can I put this in front of you, and can we work together? And you let them not only fill in the boxes, they may know, you give them studies to go look at. You just got to find them resources to be able to go, ooh, we think these things. And then you ask them, can you oversee making this come to fruition? You now have your key leadership teams. You now have a plan for your next staffing positions. You know what other people need to be passionate about, and they're committed to how they fit within the life of the church versus the way most churches run, which is, oh, you run that ministry and you run that ministry and you run that ministry and you're just concerned for this with this demographic and you're concerned. No. I know I have a part of the ministry of the church because I know that my part also needs to work with their part, because we are growing disciples.
So we hope that this was beneficial to you. We want to help. We're not just saying this just say, hey, go and figure this out. No, we want to help make that happen with you. So we would love to connect with you. If you'd go to seatsthestreets.com and be able to connect with us, you'll see a connect tab up there. Click that. You can fill out a form and to say, hey, I was here listening to you two knuckleheads on your series of the 5 questions a healthy church can answer. Can you help me with that? Yes, that's the overwhelming answer. Yes, we want to see you equipped to create committed, growing disciple makers. That's why Seats the Streets exists, is to help you create committed, growing disciple makers. We're not the heroes. You're the hero. We want to be the coach that comes in and asks specific questions, point out the things that you're doing phenomenal at that you may just not see, and to help guide you as you create your plan and coach you and celebrate with you as you implement that and you see the end result. You see the multiplication happen. So check us out, seatstostreets.com. We would love to serve you as you serve your people to make committed, growing disciple makers. So until next time, I'm J.R. Horn. That guy's still Brian Gorman, I guess, for the last 25 minutes. We will see you on the next episode. Take care.